Hello everybody, and welcome to the second tutorial to appear on my channel. This tutorial is going to be for toudo kougen, which I received a request for, and I previously recorded it and put it up a few weeks ago, so you'll want to watch the original recording I did, which I have linked in the description, first, just to kind of get it fresh in your mind, but this will step through each individual section with each individual hand, so you can kind of see how it's done. Now, if you watch the first tutorial that I put up, you'll see a few differences this time. First of all, you'll notice that the keyboard piano roll display is rotated now, because somebody pointed out that it's easier to understand this when you're seeing it in the perspective that you would actually be playing the keyboard yourself. So that's been done. Also, what has also been done is something I noticed when I was putting together the previous tutorial was it would probably be helpful if you could see when I'm pressing the sustain pedal. So now, when I press the sustain pedal, you will see the background become lighter. So when you see that, that's what that means. So without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. So here's the first 8 measures with the right hand only. Now, this can sound a little bit disorienting without hearing the left hand to keep time, so I'm going to attempt to count beats with my left hand as I'm playing this so that it's a little easier to see what's going on. Now, that actually leads into the next part with those last 3 notes. One thing that I want to point out that I may not have demonstrated really well right there because I was focusing on 2 things at once was that in the second to last measure is actually kind of done more quietly than what comes before it. So let me do that again. So like that. You'll also notice that I switched my fingers up. Like, the first time I hit the E, I'm hitting it with my index finger, but then I switched to middle and ring finger so that I can comfortably just go down to thumb for that coming up. So the first 8 measures for the left hand are pretty straightforward to learn because it's just 2 arpeggiated chords. And you do it once for the first 4 measures, and then you do the same thing again for the 5th through 8th measure. So here it goes. And that's it. You repeat that one more time, and you've got measures 1 through 8. Here's measures 1 through 8 with both hands together. So here's the right hand for measures 9 through 16, and I'm going to start with the lead-in from measure 8 just for context. Now, I want to point out a couple things. First of all, the lead-in from measure 8 into 9 has an E. But then you immediately go to E flat when you get into measure 9. So don't forget that, don't get confused by it. It's a pretty quick switch. The other thing I want to point out is when I'm at the end, my thumb is on F here, but I'm going to switch for the next F to my ring finger so that I can very easily get to this chord. So here's measures 9 through 16 in the left hand, which admittedly has quite a bit going on, so feel free to rewind this and rewatch it a few times. It gets particularly complex in the 11th to 12th measure, which I will revisit after I play the whole thing. So going into a bit more detail on the 11th and 12th measure in the left hand, and putting these two together with the left hand and right hand is probably the trickiest part of the first half of the song. But what we've basically got is a couple of arpeggios where it's not quite a perfect octave. So we've got, notice that there's an A at the top there, not a G. Then we've got starting on F sharp, but ending on G. And then we've got a straight up B flat major starting on the low F. And then this chord, which uses all 5 fingers on your left hand, getting your wits about you for this one is probably the toughest to get it coordinated. But the one thing that's working in your favor here is these two measures kind of slowed down and reach their slowest point right before you hit that chord, before going back to normal speed for the next measure. So something like that. So here's measures 9 through 16 with both hands, also including the lead-in from measure 8 again. So here's the right hand for measures 17 through 24, and the thing you want to remember when you're learning this is which notes have octaves and which ones are just a single note. So I kind of want to explain the fingering that I use for measures 21 and 22 within that section in the right hand. You can probably do this a few different ways, but this is the part after you stop doing the octaves. So, So that's the lead-in to measure 21. That's the end of measure 20. Now, the first thing I want to do is, I came up with my middle finger on A, but I want to switch to my index finger on A and hit those with ring and pinky. And then what I do here is I still have my index finger on A. I'm going to stretch and use my ring finger here and my pinky there. You can potentially do that a couple different ways. So like if that stretch is uncomfortable or you just can't do it, you could also potentially, you want your index finger here for this because you need to hit that G. So you want the index finger there, but what you could do instead is switch to thumb there. So index, thumb. That way you can just use your middle finger and pinky when you get up there. So that could work too if it's more comfortable. It just requires switching more quickly between which finger hits the A key. So here's measures 17 to 24 in the left hand. Most of this is straightforward because most of it is just arpeggiated 7 chords. But there's a couple tricky chords at the end which I'll go into detail on later. So the last couple of chords in that section are admittedly kind of gnarly. Shoutouts to the 90s, I'm using the word gnarly. What I'm doing is, the first one is pinky on B, middle finger on E, index finger on G and A, and thumb on D. That's a lot of notes. That could be kind of uncomfortable for some people. If you can make the 10th interval, but it's too uncomfortable to try hitting all the stuff in between, you could do... This is probably the most reduced simple chord that you can do with that interval and still sound pretty much on target. You could also do that if you just aren't comfortable trying to hit both notes at once with one finger. And if you really don't want to try doing that, you could just do that, or that would keep the same note but at a different octave. So if you have small hands or something, you could potentially do something like one of those. And then the next chord is this, which is a little bit, it's still a 10th interval, but it's a little bit simpler. There's no hitting 2 notes with one finger. So you've got C sharp, G, A, and E. So again, if the trying to do 2 things, like 2 fingers in the middle, is too uncomfortable, you could simplify, take the G out and just do that. Or if that's just too big of a stretch, then you could do that, which is wrapping the C sharp up 1 octave and just doing that. So you've got a couple of options on what to do with those 2 chords if you don't want to do the crazy way that I do it. So here's measures 17 through 24 with both hands together. So here's the right hand for measures 25 through 32. So I want to talk about a few things that I do in that section. First of all, that's basically a grace note into an octave, so it's kind of like that and that put together. One thing I want to point out when I do that, if you look at the previous section, you'll notice that I press down on the sustain pedal after I hit the octave, not while I have that pressed. You don't want to do it while you have that pressed. I'll contrast the difference right now. That's what you want to hear. Hear how that sounded a little bit dirtier because you had that note ringing through at the same time as that, so it's kind of as if you did that, which isn't what you want to hear. Now, going into the measure after that, I purposely want to start that phrase with my thumb so that it's the most comfortable way possible to jump to that from here. Whereas the second time when you get this phrase, I start it on the pointer finger because I want to be able to jump to this. Now this I try to do, because I'm coming from my pinky on the D right above it, I do thumb to ring finger here. If that's uncomfortable, you could just basically hop your pinky down. You're going to be holding the, well, I guess you'll be holding the pedal but letting up on it right as you do that, but it should cover it up a little bit. I do this so that it's completely smooth even without pedal, so you don't hear a gap there. And other than that, the one thing you're going to want to get used to is the phrase that you hear at the beginning of, and, well, 2 times in this section. I did that without pedal, just so you can see that you're not going to be holding on those intermediate steps very long because you need to hop right down, basically. But getting used to that is one of the keys to mastering that section, because you're going to do that twice. So here's measures 25 through 32 with just the left hand. Now this, again, is pretty straightforward because it's mostly a bunch of arpeggiated 7th chords. The only wrinkle is that at one point you're going to end up jumping down to the low A here, but it's pretty easy to get back up. You just kind of look at how I'm crossing over my fingers, and it's pretty smooth. It's not too bad. So here's measures 25 through 32 with both hands together. And that about does it. So again, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and see you next time.